Going back to your question about the history,
Yeah.
again, and it all rolls back into the engineer being an integral part of the project, very often from cradle to grave. In many cases, it's creating and being part of the team that is creating a project. There's a need. You see a need, and you fill it. Many of the projects that have ever been built, civil engineer was very much part of it. I did a presentation in New York City on the 1939 World's Fair, and my presentation was on the 3 years of construction and the 2 years of planning prior to it. My presentation ended on the day that the fair opened.
Okay.
But it was all the work that led up to it. It was a civil engineer who saw this 1,200-acre ash swamp in Queens, New York, and thought this would be a great place to transform into a World's Fair, a world-class fair site. And 5 years later, it happened. And so it was
just like that.
There was a lot that went on between that initial burst of brilliance and the opening of the fair, but the point being is that wasn't a need. Nobody was out there with an RFP on the street saying we're taking proposals for a World's Fair site. This was one individual who saw an opportunity and then made it happen.
From that 5-year twist and turn, is there a certain story arc that you see or a tidbit from it that sticks out in your mind as...
Well, one is that he was essentially he was so successful at selling it to the powers that be that he eventually kind of fell out of the whole process. And by the time it was in design and construction, he was suing the World's Fair company because again, he was given a job, but it was really on paper only.
Okay.
There were a couple of different individuals that once he sold it, it was a connection. He brought it to a cousin of Franklin Roosevelt who had some connections, who then brought it to somebody else that he knew, who brought it to Grover Whalen, who was known as like Mr. New York. He was the guy in New York City who would do the ticker tape parades when Charles Lindbergh came, or when the Yankees won the World Series. He was with the celebrities, and then so he then took it and drove it. So it was a matter of getting it to getting the right ear.
Yep.
To then advance it, and then advance it, and advance it. And a big part of it was Robert Moses, who was with New York City Parks, and it was an opportunistic time for him because that fit exactly the vision that he had for a grand park in New York City comparable to Versailles.
Okay.
And so he latched onto it, and he made everything happen that he could as a employee of New York City to make it so. And so the first year was the site, all that site work was done really under the jurisdiction of New York City Parks, driven by Robert Moses, one of the most powerful men in the early 20th century of making projects happen. And so the theme was, yes, it was this flash of brilliance by one individual civil engineer, but the way it happened was getting that in front of the right people who had common agendas or common direction or common desires that would then make it happen. If it was just left, if he just decided that, if he didn't have those connections and that network of people to advance it through, would never have happened. But it was the right idea at the right time with the right people to carry it forward.
And let me just ask you this: why? So you gave a presentation about this. Why was there an RFP about this topic, or why did you choose the 1939 World Fair?
It was the AFCE National Convention was in New York City,
okay,
and it was the 75th anniversary of the fair.
Okay.
I had written an article on it the year before. Well, actually, it was the year before was the 75th anniversary, and then when the call for papers came out, I wanted to do something that was related to New York City, and it was a natural fit for me because I'd already written an article, had done some research on it, had some photos, and it was an easy an easy move into a more comprehensive presentation.
Okay.
And but it was all driven by the fact that it was in New York City, and I wanted to do something that was local, had some local flavor to it. And not only that, the civil engineering that went into that site was incredible. Again, turning a marsh and ash dump into a World's Fair, and much of the infrastructure that was there is still there. The seawall that Moses had built or had designed is still there today, and all the water and sewer and LaGuardia Airport was accelerated because of the fair. One of the major bridges was accelerated because of the fair. The sewer treatment plants were accelerated to handle the fair. So there was a lot of infrastructure that was done both for the fair. Geotechnic, the amount of timber piles that went into that site are incredible. And not only that, the original perisphere, which was the round globe, the symbol of the 39 World's Fair was the perisphere and the trilon, which was a round globe and a three-sided obelisk.
Okay.
And those were scrapped at the end of the fair and ended up going to the war effort. But the foundation for it, still there, that was reused in 1964, and the globe that's at the 1964 fair site is sitting on the foundation from the 39 World's Fair that they tested, and it was adequate to support the new structure.
All because somebody said, why not? It'd be fun.
And it was, so they repeated it in 1964. 25 years later, they had the second fair at the same site in New York City, and a lot of that infrastructure was reused, and much of it's still there today, still serving that area of Queens, the Flushing Corona Park. It's that second only to Central Park in the city.